Chris, long time no see. How are you this week?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. No, Chris, I'm excited to talk with you. We got to communicate for the first time. I guess it was last week. Just talking a little bit about your background and your book, and got introduced to you from my friend Steve, who has also been on the Books for Guys podcast, and we've got his book spotlighted. Now we've got yours spotlighted, and so um, man, it's like I'm making my way through Tampa. The Tampa authors I'm on the trail.
I was going to say, you keep interviewing all the guys from Tampa. You're going to have to come down and visit us.
Yeah, I need to make this more of an in-person thing so I can
But
come hang out in Florida.
I was going to say, you might want to wait till like January or so, and then you'll be pretty happy.
Yeah, yeah. No, well, you're in a good spot. Like we talked about, I've been to Tampa, a beautiful area, and we'll get into it a little bit about your book too, because it's got a little bit of a theme to an area that I'm familiar with, and I know a lot of other people who have been to Tampa are. But Chris, kind of first question for you. I mean, you've been in finance and banking your whole career. What's your story to all of a sudden writing a book?
That's a great question. Um, I've always been a reader. So from the time I was a little kid, really read constantly. And I spent a lot of time, my family, we were all readers. I mentioned to you separately that my dad was a professor. And so education and reading and all those things were very important. I read a lot. My sisters read a lot. And so I think that's kind of where it all starts. You start reading things and you start thinking, I wonder if I could do this. And I think that I had a talent for English and for writing. I remember I can't remember if it was high school or college, but I had one of my teachers say, you know, you're pretty good at this. Have you ever thought about studying, either be a journalist or something like that? And of course, I ignored him and said, what are you talking about? And went into business. And so, but it was something that I did like to do. I remember writing lots of stories when I was a kid, and it was just always I've got a very active imagination, and I kind of like to take in different things that are going on. So, it was always kind of in the back of my mind that I would like to do it someday. Probably maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I wrote my first novel. And, quite frankly, I'd be probably scared to go back and read it. But
You
this
gotta have it
was
laying around somewhere.
now, this ages me, but this is pre-internet. So this is, in the day where when you're trying to get a book published, basically what you're doing is you're sending agents will give you all of, one page to convince them to take a look at your book. So
Yeah,
it's a brutal industry. And back
yeah.
then it was even worse because you had to literally mail off these query letters to agents. So you'd send 100 of them out and you'd start getting the rejections in the mail. And so every day you'd go out to the mailbox and be like, oh crap, here's another one.
Another one.
And so it was demoralizing to say the least. And, I was younger then. I wasn't really prepared for that kind of rejection. And so I kind of packed away the writing dream. But I always thought I'd like to pick it up again someday. And so I'd work on things here and there. And I had an idea I was working on that I got a ways through, and I had told one of my wife's friends, Melissa, about it. And she's, everybody needs a hype person in their life.
Yeah.
Melissa's a hype person. She literally, has always got something positive to say about us. Is always, she's just a great person to be around. And she would always ask me, "How you come with that book? Where are you with that book?" And I'd be, I'm kind of working on it. And so we were out at the beach a couple years ago, and he asked me the same question. And I said, you know what? I'm going to finish this. I am going to. And I literally went back to, our condo we were staying at, and I started sketching out just on a legal pad, some additional chapters and ideas. And then I just committed to, I was going to work on it. I was working full time. and I just committed that I was going to spend a couple hours, at night on the weekend, and I was going to get it done. Whether it was good, bad, or ugly, I was going to
Yeah.
finish this novel. And so I did it. I committed to it, and I worked through it and I got that draft done. And I, wasn't really even sure what to do at that point. And my wife had a friend who was in the industry, and she said, I'll read it for you and basically give it what they call a developmental edit. So it's really your chance to put in front of someone who knows what they're doing, and they'll tell you either this is good, or eh. And I told her, I said, listen, you just need to be completely honest with me. If this is awful, tell me, And so I sent it off, and then just, waited for a few weeks and thought, oh my God, what is this person going to say? And, she came back and she said, it's a great story. She said, you're missing some structural, the way you've structured it isn't quite right. And I said, well, that would make sense because I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. So she taught me how to basically structure a fiction story,
Mm,
it's really kind of amazing once you've done it. It's a formula almost,
yeah.
every chapter is structured a certain way, the book is
Yep.
structured, and you just follow that all the way through. So there's certain rules. And once I understood that, I realized, that initial draft wasn't right. And I really just did a full rewrite.
Yeah.
And as I've worked on my second book now, it really helped me a lot because now I don't have to go back and do kind of those basic things to make
Yeah.
sure it's a quality. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
story about how I got from, of why I wanted to be a writer,
Yeah.
and kind of did it like I said in my spare time, and something I would like to do, from here on out if I can.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. And I always find it fascinating too. Like, yeah, I've learned a lot as I've spoken to several authors now on just the process of writing a story in a book and just the different little rules almost that help you complete a book. Because in fiction and nonfiction, I know there's a little bit of differences in how you write that. But I guess my question to you is when you started writing the story, and specifically talking about Bluebird, a Cigar City thriller, which I also want to ask, because I just kind of assumed, but is that based off Ybor City there in Tampa?
Yeah. So when I moved to Florida, and I started my banking career, I've lived in a few different places, but I've worked in Ybor City for, well, the last decade. And but I've worked around Ybor for a really long time when I first moved down here. So for people who don't know the area, Ybor City is kind of our almost like a Bourbon Street. It's not as large, but it's really kind of the nightlife area, or one of the nightlife areas of Tampa. And the history, though, is absolutely amazing. You really don't even know the history. At first, you move here, and that's where you go out on the weekends. And if you want to get in trouble from midnight till 3 in the morning, Ybor City is a great place to do it. And so that's all I really knew about it. Then I started working down there, and it's such a cool place. It's a lot of brick roads. It is a lot of old buildings, and then you study the history, and the history is amazing. It basically was the first really cigar or capital of cigar making in the United States. Early, so in the 1900s or the end of 1800s, cigars were made in Cuba, and they were made in Key West, actually. And then they figured out that Tampa would be a good place. And so they settled on Ybor, and at this point, there really wasn't anything in Tampa. And as a matter of fact, Ybor City was basically a swamp. And so they moved the bears and panthers and snakes out and filled it in with sand. And they started building factories and to make these cigars. And those same cigar buildings are still around today. And as a matter of fact, where I worked in Ybor for a long time, we were basically right next door to one. And you start to, kind of understand the history of Ybor. And I always, when first book I wrote, I set it in Chicago, ironically. And I did that because I just felt like every mystery or every thriller was set in a big city.
Yeah.
And I hardly knew anything about Chicago. So I would assume it probably didn't make a lot of sense. And so I always said, if I write something else, I'm going to set it in Tampa.
Yeah.
And as I got to know Ybor, I thought, what could be a better place than Ybor City with all the history, all of the good, and like I said earlier, good, bad, and ugly of it. It's an amazing place. And Tampa Bay in general turned out to be just a great area to set a book in. I mean, we've got everything here. We've got Ybor, we've got the beaches, we've got nice areas, we've got scary areas, and I think it really worked well in Bluebird. That's why I use the subtitle as Cigar City Thriller. A lot of people know that Tampa is known as the Cigar City, and I get comments on that all the time. I get emails from people that are in other states that say, "Oh, I've been to Ybor before, and that's why I picked
Yeah.
up your book." And so it's just a nice little nod to the area. And as I work on my second book now, I've got it'll same thing. It's a series, so it'll be many of the same characters. It's set in the same area, and I try to work a little bit more of the history of Tampa and Ybor into the story.
Yeah. That's awesome because I've been a few times and it was really cool to see, people hand rolling the cigars in certain shops down that street. And I'd always heard about it. And when people found out I was going, they're like, "You got to go to Ybor City. You got to go to Ybor City," and then walk around and just experience it. So yeah, for anyone who hasn't been, it's one of those places you just got to go and see what it's all about. But it's really cool that you're incorporating your city, Tampa, into your book because I'm sure that makes it a little bit easier. I mean, like you said, you were trying to make it about Chicago, but didn't really, you know a little about Chicago, but nothing like your home place to where you can really dive in and provide details of stuff that you've experienced while living there. And so I'm sure that's a cool feeling too to write a book about where you're at and include all of that in this story.
Yeah, I think that I feel incredibly blessed to have been able to move to Tampa, when I was in my early 20s. And it's a place that obviously moved down here, never went home. And now I've lived here. I've lived here a lot longer than I did when I grew up in Nebraska. And so, it's a place that I've had a great life. I've got a family. And like I said, I feel really lucky to live here. So for me to be able to kind of use it as the place where the story takes place and maybe turn some people on to the area, I think that's great. For the people that live here, they love all of the different areas that I call out because I try to use real places for the most part throughout the book. So you don't all have people like we've got a famous restaurant here, Wright's, which is sandwiches and whatnot. Someone came up to me and they said, "Oh, that was great. I hadn't been to Wright's for 15 years and I read it in your book and I couldn't stop thinking about it." And so I have those comments. Ybor, downtown Tampa is under a big revitalization. So I try to plug that in. And I think that, also for those that aren't in the area, a lot of people come here to vacation. So, they can be at home and read the book, and there's all these things about the area, and it's like a little vacation without having to get on a plane.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a great setting, and you can go in a lot of directions.
Yeah. It's always cool when I'm reading books and they incorporate, I've lived in Atlanta, I've lived in San Antonio, I've lived in Nashville. And anytime I just see the city mentioned in a book, I just immediately lock in or they mention a place there and I'm like, "Oh, I've seen it. I've been there." So similar with your book, there's places where it's going to be like, "Oh, I remember that. This makes sense to me," which is really cool. But Chris, so you mentioned this is going to be a series. So when you started writing this book, did you start with having an end in mind, or did you have more of just kind of the middle juice and you're like, "Okay, I'm going to start somewhere, see if I can build off that," or was it you started at the beginning and you've made the story to a point where you can add on to it? How does your thought process go into as a nonfiction writer, or a fiction writer, how do you get your story out there and how do you organize it?
Yeah, so there's you probably heard this from other authors, but there's a couple different styles of writers. There's and probably some in between, but they either call you a pantser or a plotter. And so a plotter is somebody who, writes out exactly what's going to happen, and they've got it chapter by chapter, and they've got it all. Um, I am definitely not that. Unfortunately, I wish I was. For both the first and the second book, I came up with the end first, and then I came up with the beginning, and then you got to fill it all in between. And the problem with that is, um, and quite frankly, I'll come up with a chapter that I think will fit in that I really am excited to write, and I will plug it in, and it may be totally out of order. And so as you get back at the end and you got to pull it all together, you got to make sure it all makes sense. You got
Mhm.
to make sure it's chronologically goes correctly. You got to make sure you didn't kill off a character and forgot about it. And so, I wish I was a plotter, but I'm definitely not. I just am all over the place, and I think it all starts for me with when I think of a good end. It's kind of fun. It's like putting a puzzle together. Then I think of a good start, and then I got to figure out as I'm going along, how's this all going to work? And then you come up with new ideas. I think writers probably like my mind's always thinking about things that I can add. And so, or sometimes you're writing and then you think of something that's really good, but it changes the whole direction of the book. And then you got to go back and fix parts. And so I think that I wish I could just lay it out, but I just can't do it. I
Yeah,
just, if I come up with something I think is good, because I think the beginning, they say really you've got that first chapter to get somebody hooked in. And so, and in some cases, you've got that first paragraph to get people hooked in. And unfortunately, in today's world, I think the attention spans are definitely less and less. And so you have got to keep people engaged from beginning to end. And I think that's what's so great about with what you're doing is, I want to see more people reading. I know what it means to me. Even though I'm writing, I still read as much as I ever have. Unfortunately, it usually causes me to fall asleep at night, but it's been a lot of fun as people have read my book that know me, and they'll say, I haven't read a book in, you know, 20 years. I haven't read a book since college. And, they read it because they know me. And then they say, that was actually really good, and start reading. Like I've got a relative who did that, hadn't read a book forever. And now he reads, tries to do two a month. And so I think what you're doing is fantastic. The more people we can get to get off of, away from TV, you know, away from staring at their phones constantly, except to watch this,
yeah,
and to, just kind of reading's just different. You use your brain, you envision characters, and I think it's something that keeps you, mentally sharp as well.
yeah. Yeah, I always say now it's better to fall asleep reading than to not be able to fall asleep while watching TV, with the blue light disrupting your sleep.
Right.
No, and Chris, that's why these conversations are important because I want people to see, you're not just an author. You're a professional who has been in a high level banking and financial space for many, many years, and you've happened to write a book, which is very cool because it's like you can do both. You can be a leader and a writer, a reader, and you're just constantly learning and you challenged yourself to write a book. It was something that you tried at once. You kind of thought you may have failed a little bit, got a lot of rejection, and then thankfully had your cheerleader. I think it was Melissa. You said get you to accept the challenge again and put a book out there. And now there's people that are reading it, and you're making it a series. But it's just again, it's so cool that what you've done because I think young guys are looking up to people like you and being like, okay, if Chris, if he's in finance, but he's also written a book, like there's all these things I can do and learn from, and I think they can get a lot of encouragement from it. And so, just having someone like yourself to be a role model or to be seen in this light is, I think it'll create a positive impact, and hopefully a lot of people will pick up your book and read it and enjoy it, especially if someone knows the Tampa area. I think it makes it that much more enjoyable. But nonetheless, just seeing someone successful like you being a professional and then, authoring a book and now doing more. I just think it's a good lesson for young guys and a good person for guys to look up to and see that.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think you can do anything that you're passionate about. You just have to find the time. And it's easy not to. But if you really want to do something, listen, we've all, you know, even writers that have been doing it for a long time, many aren't lucky enough to be able to do it for a living. And so, we all have jobs. And luckily, or hopefully, you can find something you're passionate about work wise. As you said, I've been in banking for 30 years and it's been just a great career. I tried to retire in March from it and do something else. And I got sucked back into,
Yeah.
a new bank here in Tampa that's forming. And I just love being around the people. I missed doing that. And so I kind of finally came to the conclusion I'm probably always gonna work in some form or fashion. It's something again that I really enjoy. One part of me enjoys it. But then, I think everybody's just got to try those things that they're passionate about and see if you can do it. And, just because, you might fail once doesn't mean you just keep sharpening your skills. Like I said, I bet if I went back and read my first book, I'd probably be horrified. But might do that someday. But it's amazing with technology today. You can you can do figure out how to do anything. There are a million, YouTube videos and how-to books and all these different things, these master classes on different subjects. If you want to try something, you should. And it's not probably going to be easy because most people, again, they have a job, they've got families, they got kids, you've got choices to make, but instead of spending the 2 hours watching TV at night, do something, to expand your brain and maybe give you something you can do in the future. And so, yeah, I mean, I would highly encourage, I can't think of anything that I've done that's been better. It's been so, when we had the book release party, it was about a year ago. I mean, it was one of the best nights I've ever had. It was all
Yeah.
my family and friends and strangers and people came to support. And then to hear the feedback on the book has been so positive. And, to have people constantly reaching out, asking when the second book's going to get done, it's really fun. It's really cool
Yeah.
to actually get the book done. But, it does take a while.
Yeah. Now you've got a little pressure. You did you
Little
did
pressure.
well on
Yeah.
the first one. Now you gotta come through on the second one. But no,
Yeah.
you're right.
And
There's not a better feeling than working hard to accomplish something, and then when you do it, how gratifying and just having that moment of like, "Man, that was worth it." Because you can see your face light up when you talk about completing it in that
yeah.
night and having all your friends and people there to talk about it. It was like s all I'm sure you had times where you were like, "Oh, this is frustrating. How do I get to the next part of this? How
Yeah.
do I get this put together? How do I the editing process to get it out here?" I'm sure there's so many times where you're just like, "Oh, I wish this was a little bit easier," but,
Yeah, I think
nonetheless, it's worth
anything
it.
you do that's creative based, it's subject to people's opinions too.
Mhm.
And so some people might like what you do, some people might not. And you just have to have a thick skin and believe in what you're doing. And again, always work on getting better. And listen, you don't have to listen to those that might not like something. That's their own opinion. And there's a lot more people that do. And those are the ones that encourage you to keep going and enjoy what you're doing. And I mean, that's the key part. You better make sure you like it because it's something you're doing extra. And so, I think it's a blessing to me to get to do it, quite frankly, and it's fun. And so whether if nobody ever reads another thing or not, I'll keep doing it because I enjoy it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Love the passion behind it and love that you're able to do this and continue doing it. Um, but Chris, I got one last question for you, and it may be a difficult one because you've always been a reader, so you've probably read tons of books that have meant something to you or that you think about in certain scenarios. But Just for our audience, what's a book or two that has had an impact on you personally or professionally? And when people ask you for a good book recommendation, what's one that you like to recommend to others?
Yeah, so the reason I wrote um or the reason I am writing a series, a fiction series, is that that's what I read. I love, I love series, so I love to read something and then wait for a year for the next one to come out, and you're like, I'm first one that actually still goes to a bookstore and actually gets it, and you get invested in those characters. And I mean, I'll tell you just a short little story. We're at like a dinner party one night where with friends, and everybody had read Bluebird. And so they were literally having a conversation about these characters and their thoughts of them, sat there like they were people. And I just thought, this is really surreal being here and listening to this thing that came in my mind. And now these people all have all these different favorite characters, different. And so, I gravitate towards, those types of things. So writers like Brad Thor, is one of my favorites. He's written 20 something books. Mark
Mhm.
Greaney, for those who like the Gray Man series, he's fantastic. Jack Carr
Yeah,
does,
love Jack Carr's books.
oh, his just fantastic.
Yeah,
And I read those, and those motivate me to get better. And then the other side of my personality is, work related, and I've read or listened to lots and lots of books. I love podcasts as well. So I'm always, when I'm on my way to work, I'm always listening to something. And so, just give you an example, I'm listening right now to um, Kenny Chesney's book that he wrote about his life. I like music. I saw him in concert, and I knew it would be good, but it really speaks to following dreams and how hard it was for him, and it motivates you to keep going with whatever you want to do. So that's been a really good one. I read recently 1929. It's a story of the Wall Street crash, and that's a great one just because it reminds you that all these things that are happening in today's world, look in the back, look in the past. All these things have happened before.
happened. Yep.
And you should study history because it will tell you what will happen in the future. And so that was a great one. Um, Good to Great is a great business book that just talks about building a business or building a division. I love Extreme Ownership. That's a really good one, for, again, a business book. And there was a book that I read years ago called The Way of the SEAL, and it was written by Mark Devine, who is a Navy SEAL, and he does all these different things. But that was a great one. I read or listened to that one over and over again. And so, I don't listen to many over or read many more than once, but if I find something really good, I will go back to it. And, especially if it's something that I can use in my profession, or if I can, even use in, being more, um, having better habits for myself and for my writing. So I'm just always trying to improve, and I'm always trying to learn something. And I don't think you're ever too old for that. I think you should always be striving to get better, and it makes life more enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean that's the key takeaway if nothing else right there is keep your curiosity, always continue learning. I haven't read all the books you've mentioned, but I've heard of several of them. And I always, if someone says they've read a book more than once, I definitely add that to my list because if you've read something more than once, that means you really got something from it. So I usually ask that question, is there one you read more than once? And you answered that. But the Kenny Chesney book, I'm also extremely interested in reading his. I've also seen him in concert, been following him forever. And then just he's been on a lot of shows lately, obviously promoting his book and whatnot. And I haven't had a chance to pick it up yet, but that one is definitely on my list because I'm a big Kenny Chesney fan.
Well, I mean, it reminds you as you listen to them that people, no matter how successful they are, everybody's gone through something to get to that level. And, he's no different. He talks about, even when he was putting out, had hits, he was still broke. And, it took him a long time to get to the level. And, we saw him, maybe 3 or 4 months ago in a stadium with 60,000 people. And you just see what his life has become. But it's fun to read about those early days. And I like those books as well, reading about, and it's a kind of a different thing. It's a nice break if you read a lot of business books, or even fiction, learning about somebody's life, that you think you know a lot about, and turns out you don't. You don't know, much about them at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I love biographies and autobiographies like that. Just because, yeah, you see some people who are successful or doing big things like Kenny is, and uh, you got to remember they didn't just wake up and become successful. There's a whole backstory to getting to that point. So it's always a good refresher to read stories like his. But um, Chris, man, thank you so much for doing this, and it's an honor to have your book on the website. Can't wait till the next books in your series come out, and I'm sure you'll write even more. And so I can't wait to follow it and include them on Books for Guys. And thank you for your support for what we're doing at Books for Guys too. It means more than you know. And man, just keep doing what you're doing. Can't wait to read your stories and follow what you come up with. And it's going to be super exciting. I can't wait to read. I haven't read Bluebird yet, but it's on my list specifically again because I've been to Tampa, so I can't wait to kind of incorporate what I remember as I read your book. So I'm really excited about it.
Well, I really do appreciate you having me on. And anytime you get to go on and talk about something you're doing, it's exciting.
Yeah,
That, especially, for authors, because it's hard to get, your material out there. And so anytime anybody's willing to talk to you about it, and, I think a lot, like I said, of what you're doing. And I think it's very honorable to try to get more people, more people to read and turned on to it. And so I fully support it, and, hope you're really successful with it. And, again, I really appreciate you having me on.
yeah. No, we appreciate it, Chris. We'll have to make this a reoccurring thing. Every time you
Please.
have a new book released, we'll just have a new conversation and talk about it. And so, but
March,
again,
end of March next year,
okay,
we'll do it again.
March 2026, the next book comes out. So you got to
You
get the
got it.
first one read. So, no, that's awesome. We appreciate it, Chris.
All right, Chris. Thank you, and good luck with everything.